I don't know if anybody was tracking or following along kind of the schedule that we had in the chapel. We talked a little bit about who's taking what day. December we had a really unique opportunity because over the last 7 months we've been going back and forth between Discover Church and the Methodist Church, and we kind of trading weeks back and forth. In December we had this awesome opportunity. We had 3 weeks in a row, leading right up to Christmas. It'll actually be 3 or 4 days before Christmas will be the last Sunday that Discover has at the chapel. So we were talking about it, like let's put together an Advent series. And through all this planning, Christmas was preached today. And earlier this week, we were talking about the worship and setting up, planning out worship, and the question came up as we're planning, like, who's preaching? And it's like, it was Chris and Andre and Caleb. And in the group chat, Chris kind of lobbed me a softball and said, unless Nate wants to preach. Well, after the whole series you just did on stretching your faith, I don't know that I can really say no. And like, no, I'm gonna. Like, and we talked about it, and he said, don't feel stressed or anything. I was like, I had to toss it right back to say, this is just an opportunity to grow in the body to stretch my faith. So at Tuesdays when I committed to this, and I said, I'll put together a message, and I'll take it, and I thank you for that opportunity. So if you look at your listener guide, prepared a message today, I happily titled it to begin the Advent series, that Advent begins in the darkness. Which is kind of a weird thing to think about, talking about Advent and Christmas, and associating that with darkness. A lot of what we do when we look at Christmas is the lights, the cookies, the candles, just all this brightness and cheer and everything's like so good. And to sit here and the message is centered around darkness, or that at least the message begins in darkness.
Well, we are in the dark right now.
We are in the dark. That was not by accident. Everybody can see okay, right? If not, I think all your little personal computers in your pocket have flashlights on. And just because it helps so much, these are actually super dark. They turn in a lot darker than I thought they were going to. So, good luck. But yeah, so Advent begins in the darkness. There's something that's deeper than just the brightness that we associate with Christmas now. It's something deeper than the nostalgia and just the happiness behind everything, and that we have this happiness in Christmas and the happiness in this Advent because of hope. It's like that everything in the Advent series is based in hope. Hope is what starts the Advent. The Advent was the coming and the announcement of Jesus, and that it was the promised birth of the King and Messiah that was going to save us, and that was all the hope that was promised. So we'll dive right in. Point number 1, or if you want to turn there while we're going on the slide, point number 1, we're going to start in Genesis 15, seeing that the promise of hope starts all the way back in the beginning. All the way back to Genesis 15. Just a little bit of context in Genesis, or in this chapter of Genesis. Abram is talking, it's not Abraham, he's Abram, he's talking with God, and they're sitting there having this conversation now. Leading up to this, chapters 12, 13, and 14, Abram's been through a lot. He's been through a lot in a relatively short amount of time. He had the journey of leaving Ur. He experienced a lot of famine. He had separation from his nephew, as well as he experienced a little bit of war. And coming through all this, God has been promising him that you and your descendants will prosper, that your descendants will grow, man. And Abram gets to this point that he's been getting hit from left and right, and he has this opportunity. He talks to God. And he says in verse 2, I think the first thing God says is, Abram, do not be afraid. So this is where we see that God starts this conversation with Abram. And Abram kind of lays it out in levels with God. He's like, look, you keep promising me this, and I've been faithful, and I still want you, but where's my promise in this? He goes, if this is what it's going to keep taking, and if this is what I keep wanting, he says, I don't know if I want descendants. He goes, this is what the descendants are going to go through. So he goes, you keep promising me, and you keep promising that my descendants will prosper, and that the descendants that Israel will have. Then he's like, but this is where we're coming from. He's like, I don't know. He's like, where is my promise in this? And that's where we're going to pick up, starting there in verse 9. Verse 8 to verse 9. God tells Abram he wants to enter a covenant with him. The actual original, or the original Hebrew word there is a little bit interesting that it wasn't that I want to enter a covenant. The Hebrew term actually more translates to I want to cut a covenant with you. Understanding just a little bit of historical context, the way the covenants were back then, it was an agreement, right? We would, I guess, kind of consider that more like contractual agreements now. But it wasn't done on paper. That's, where would the glory be in that? Or where's the revival or anything? So the way that these covenants were set up, you would have sacrificial animals, or animals, and they would be sacrificed. They would be cut in half, and you would lay out a path or an idol, and it'd be the covenant idol. Now, the parties in this covenant would both walk the aisle, or the parties entering this covenant would walk the aisle. They would recite the terms of this covenant, that I promise this, if you give this, and if you do this, then I will do this. Now, the penalty for breaking the covenant in these Old Testament times was, surely it was death. And the reason that they had the animals and they were split this way is because you had both halves of the party, both halves of the covenant, and it was symbolic, and what it was going through is that if I break this covenant, may I become torn like that. So there's a little bit of historical back and forth that depending on how the covenant was set up, if you had two equal parties or equal-ish parties, they would walk the covenant aisle together. They would both enter this saying that I'm responsible for the covenant, and I'm also responsible for the punishment if I break it. Now, the context is a little different if you're talking about a king and a dominated country or a dominated leader, where you had a greater and a lesser party. Usually, the greater party would not walk the aisle. So if you're talking about the dominating king or the greater king, the lesser party would walk the aisle, and it would be his responsibility. So it's more apt to understand that the party that walked the aisle of the covenant was the one that was responsible for the penalty if the covenant was broken. Now we see something really interesting here, and it's the only place that this happens in the Bible. Reading through Genesis 15. So starting at verse 9, God instructs Abram to prepare the covenant aisle. He tells him which animals to go get. And Abram automatically knows he immediately knows what's going on, because okay, God wants to set up this agreement with me, and that's a little unheard of that God's going to enter. God himself is going to enter the covenant with Abram, but God wants to show that I've been promising you this, and I've been promising this for your descendants. So I'm going to enter this covenant with you, and understanding the penalties that are there with it. So Abram goes and gets the animals. He sets up the aisle. He cuts the animals and divides them, and he sets up the aisle. And as we see in verse 12, Abram falls into a God-given deep sleep. The exact verse is that, and a deep sleep fell over Abram. Now the word deep sleep there, or that sleep that fell over him, is the same Hebrew word that was used in Genesis 2, when God caused a sleep to fall over Adam in order to create Eve. So this word is, as I mentioned, the darkness on the print. I can't read my notes. Tardana, sorry. The word tardana, the Hebrew word tardana, that's the same word used in Genesis 2 when Adam was caused to sleep in order for God to take Adam's rib and create Eve. So even though it doesn't say in verse 12 directly that God caused the sleep on Abram, it's understood through a little bit of the hermeneutics and the language study there. But the great sleep fell over Abram, and then a great dreadful darkness fell upon him. This, and it's a little bit of symbolic that, or symbolism that the dreadful darkness was understood as the presence of the Lord had descended. It was the same, not dread, but the same heaviness of the presence of the Lord being, or the Lord being present. So, as God descends and he starts laying out the covenant, and Abram is present, but he's asleep. What's interesting is that, so the darkness fell, and a smoking pot and a flaming torch appeared. Now, I'm not going to get deep in the weeds with the symbology behind this, because we could spend all day and I have limited time, but the symbology behind the smoking pot and the flaming torch, they both represent God in this moment, but the smoking pot represents the hiddenness and the ever-present, the fulfillingness of the Spirit of the Lord. And tying that to, you ever burn something in a room or something down the hall, burns popcorn, you can smell it everywhere. So that's the presence of the Lord. He's forever present, he's pertinent, he's persistent through everything. And then the flaming torch is the revelation insight and guidance from the Lord. So this is straightforward. This is a theophany. This is the physical manifestation of the Lord in the Old Testament. This is the bit different than the Christophany, where it's the representation usually as a man, a figure of man. Usually it's different than Christophany, where it's a manifestation of a man, or it's the Lord manifesting as man, but this is symbolically something that physically was present, representing the Lord. So this was the Lord present. Now it says that the smoking pot and the flaming torch walked the aisle alone, reciting the covenant. So in doing this, Abram didn't walk with. Now, going back to what I said about the greater and the lesser party walking the aisle, usually the lesser party that would walk the aisle and they would accept the responsibility. The Lord walked the aisle by himself, and he said, I will hold this covenant with you. These are the promises I give you. And I accept the responsibility that if this covenant is broken, that I will be the one torn. Now, it's not just if the Lord breaks the covenant, because one of the few things the Lord cannot do is he cannot lie. So the Lord is going to forever hold his promise. But he also says if you break your covenant, that I will be, or that the Lord will be stricken, the Lord will be ripped, the Lord will be torn. And this is a prophecy of and a promise of what is yet to come 2,000 years later, when Jesus was born. Because the covenant was eventually, or inevitably, the covenant was broken. It was a covenant that we could not keep, that forever faithfulness. We could not keep it in the way that was required. That the Lord came down in one flesh, and he was torn. His flesh was torn, he was split, and not only was he split and torn, and he bore that punishment for us, but he walked Calvary alone. Just like the same Lord walked the aisle alone. So, understanding where this promise of hope and the advent begins in darkness, we also see the prophecy of hope. Point number 2, the prophecy of hope all throughout the Old Testament, and there's hundreds of examples of this. But I wanted to pick out 3 specific ones. I wanted to pick out 3 specific ones, and I have these listed as A, B, and C. Kind of going to go through these a little bit quickly. But for those of you, anybody who's had to do any sort of reporting or just telling them what happened, I didn't pick up all 5 W's, but I picked a couple of them. So we got the the what, the how, and the where. 5 W's. So, point number A, we see the hope in the coming king. Is the promised child. In Isaiah 9, turn there real quick. In Isaiah 9, we see the promise of the king and how he's going to arrive. He's going to arrive as a child. He's going to arrive. For a child will be born of us, a son will be given to us, the government on his shoulder, and he will be named the Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, Eternal Father, and the Prince of Peace. We see all these wonderful names and these powerful names given to the child that is yet to come. This is a prophecy that was given in the Old Testament all the way back in Isaiah. So we see that Jesus was promised Jesus was promised in the Old Testament. It's the hope of the coming king. So the king is going to be born of a child, and this child is going to be given the government. But not only in verse 6 do we see, verse 6 and verse 7, his dominion will be vast, his prosperity will never end, and over his kingdom will establish and sustain. It says that he will reign forever and ever. He will reign today and forever. His reign will never end, whether he's here or not. So, that's one of the examples in the Old Testament. Number B, we have the hope through suffering and sacrifice. We see the servant attitude in Isaiah 53. This is a term that I came across a little bit ago called upside down servanthood. Is that even though he was the king, just as we saw in Genesis 15, where the Lord came down, the greater party came down and walked the aisle, he then again came down in the mortal flesh, not to rule as a king, he didn't rule through might and power, but he ruled through servitude. He came down, and he came down as a servant. He bore in flesh. He bore our sickness. He bore our iniquity. He bore our transgressions. And yet he's still the everlasting king. He appeared ordinary. it wasn't that he came down and yes, the heavens sang, but there was nothing extraordinary about him. In Isaiah 53, it's described that he was very mild in appearance. He wasn't this regal authority by appearance, because he looked ever so normal. He looked ever just like every one of us. And he came down because he came down, he was just this very meek and not in a great appearance. It was already prophesied that we were despised and rejected, and that he would be stricken and he would be torn, just as we saw again going back to Genesis 15, where all this started, that Adam began in darkness. We are healed by his wounds. We went astray like sheep. We have turned our own way, and the Lord has punished him. That him in that sentence, that last verse, in verse 6, the Lord punished him. The him isn't us, because he is our shepherd. The shepherd is the one that wears the punishment for the sheep that go astray. It's not the sheep. The sheep will get brought back, but the shepherd is the one that's ultimately responsible. And last for number 2, we have hope in a humble place. This is talking about Bethlehem and understanding that we are telling this whole prophecy about a coming king, and just kind of putting in place understanding what Bethlehem was. Bethlehem was not a grand city. It was, at best estimation, between 200 and 1,000 people. It was a little town, and it was often overshadowed by Jerusalem, which was only like 6 miles away. So, just to kind of tie this to today, it would be like a little suburb of a city outlying and, not quite far away. But we know it's there, but nobody really talks about it when we're talking about Jerusalem. Nobody's thinking of Bethlehem. Now, to say that a king is going to come from Bethlehem was not in any way an understatement. This is something that was not ever heard of, or it was rather unusual to say that somebody of royalty is going to come from a little podunk town. And don't get me wrong, I love podunk town. I'm a small town at heart through and through, but in no way would I expect the royalty to come from there. Especially not understanding the way that royal lines were carried in the Old Testament. So he was a regular man. He was a very mild man that was born in a very small, unusual town, not unusual, an unheard of town. And that's one great, but to sit here and say that the king's coming from away, this was already prophesied in the Old Testament. This is just another one of the Old Testament prophecies that Jesus upheld, or that was upheld through the birth of Jesus. And through the advent, the promise of the king to return. So understanding where Advent begins in the darkness, I have number 3, the promise of hope was delivered. So moving to the New Testament, I got 2 that we're going to touch on a little bit, and then the third one is just a further explanation by Paul. But in Luke 1, 26 through 38, it's the prediction of Jesus' birth. This is when, we all know the story, when Gabriel appeared to Mary, and he said, Mary, you're going to break this child. And she just kind of gasped. She goes, well, how can I? Like, I'm not even married. Like, how can I have a child? The child's going to be the son of the living God, and you shall name him Jesus, and you shall still marry Joseph, but you're going to have the son of our high God, because the Lord is favorite, and you'll find great favor in you. And Mary's kind of taken aback by all this. Looking at Luke, I'm going to pick a couple verses out of that little section I gave you. The Lord replied to her, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore, the Holy One will be born, and will be called the Son of God. Consider your relative Elizabeth. She is conceived the son in her old age in the 6th month. For who was called childless? For nothing is impossible with God. And Mary said, see, I am the Lord's servant. May it happen to me as you have said. And then the angel left her. So this was, the promise was already delivered it no longer was a promise. It wasn't just a word, but the word had a heartbeat. The hope in the promise, all the way back to Genesis 15, now had a heartbeat. The promise was upon us. The advent of Jesus had begun. Moving on to letter B, in John 1, specifically John 1:5, but John chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. In the beginning was the Word was God, and the Word was with God. Or the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And He was with God in the beginning, and all things were created through Him. And apart from Him, there is not one thing was created that has been created. In Him is life, and that life is the light of men, and the light shines in the darkness, and yet the darkness did not overcome it. So again, going back to the prophecy and the promise of the arrival of the King is also named, or Jesus is also named the life, and the life is named the light. And it even says here that the light is never going to dominate. The light will always prosper. The light will always overcome the darkness. And looking at time, we're going to breeze through letter C real quick. This is just in Philippians 2:5-11. This is Paul explaining to the church of Philippi everything which Jesus had come and done. That he I can't read my notes. I turned off too many lights. But that Jesus came and He emptied Himself. Jesus came and He emptied Himself on the cross. But He was assuming the form of a servant and in the likeness of humanity. And when He came as man, He humbled Himself, becoming obedient even to the point of death. Just as it was foretold in the Old Testament. Because the covenant was broken, that ultimate punishment of a broken covenant is the tearing of, or the breaking of, all the way to death. That as God walked the aisle by Himself, as God walked the aisle alone, that the punishment was upon God, and that's why Jesus, the Son of the Lord, came down to mortal flesh and was torn for us. But I'm going to go back to B just for a second, talking about the light and calling Jesus the light of life and the light of man. And if you want to have the lights real quick. So, we kind of had this crazy idea, and I found a bunch of candles in the background. This is why we have the lights on, because all the other lights, there's about 12 switches to turn off all the other lights, and that would be one switch. That's a lot faster. But Advent begins in the darkness. We're sitting right now, right? And in the darkness, all we're looking for is that light. Whether it's the light at the end of the tunnel, it's the light so that we can be able to see what we're doing. But it's just looking for something. Darkness overconsumes everything, but the light pushes back to darkness. It's not that the darkness is turned off by the light, but the light overpowers the darkness. Now, the light doesn't wait for permission. As soon as I turn these lights off, with this candle lit, you can automatically see that the light is already coming from the candle and it's reaching you from here. The light is going out and pushing back the darkness so you can see. Now, just a little anecdotal story to kind of make it a little bit more tangible, a little bit more fun, because it's kind of been like a weirdly heavy message for an Advent, just beginning an Advent series. So, talking about beginning in the darkness and that light pushes back the darkness. It happens oftentimes where either I go to bed early and I'm already in bed, the lights are off, or Kelly gets up before me and she has to turn the lights on. She'll kind of give me a warning. She's like, hey, I'm getting ready to turn the lights on. And no matter what I do, I close my eyes, I cover my face, I bury my head in the pillow, there's nothing I can do that stops the light from coming. And no matter how much I prepare myself, that light is going to come. She's going to turn the switch on. Now, Kelly didn't turn off the darkness. She turned on the light, and that light chased everything out. And in that moment, sometimes it hurts a little bit. And there was nothing I could do to prepare it. So looking back to that passage in Luke, where Mary was told, you're going to have the Son of Man. You're going to have, Son of the Lord. you're going to be pregnant. She wasn't ready. She even kind of argued for a minute. She's like, but how can I, for I'm not married? Joseph wasn't ready when later an angel appeared to Joseph and said, do not be afraid, still be faithful to Mary. Like, he wasn't ready for the controversy that was going to come because the woman that he was betrothed to is all of a sudden pregnant. And just all of the drama behind that. Nobody was ready for the light to come, but the light didn't ask permission. The light comes anyway. And honestly, I would put it even still today, that 2,000 years later, we're still not ready for the light to come. But the light came. The light is available. The light is ready for anybody. And it's the advent and the coming of Christ so that he could adorn our flesh, or sorry, that he could adorn the flesh to wear the stripes for our transgression that he bore the punishment for. That light came whether we were ready for it or not. And I had a part B to that demonstration, or just to that kind of anecdotal story, because I wasn't sure how many junior Marines we have in here. I got a couple Marines in here, so for those of us not married or that don't have somebody that warns us that life's going on, we all remember in boot camp, right? 10 seconds before 04. What did Firewatch do? Lights. And no matter what happened, those lights came on. You can turn them on. No matter what happened, those lights came on. And even with that warning, you had all of 3 seconds to figure out what you're going to do in that moment. Panic, yes. Usually it was panic. And, actually, let's spin off that for a moment. That even in the moment that Mary was told, she had at least 9 months to figure it out. But I'm sure there was a moment of panic. And even when Joseph was told, hey, your fiance, to use today's terms, is pregnant with the Son of the Lord, I'm sure he panicked too. And then there's all the prophecies that even the Sadducees know about, all the Pharisees and Sadducees, those most high of the Hebrew church, or the Hebrew synagogue, that they knew that there was going to be a king coming and they weren't ready for it either. They fought and argued about it all the way to the moment they took it to the cross. That light is coming whether we're ready for it or not. Whether it's my wife turning on the bedroom light because she was up before me, Firewatch turning on the lights because it's about to be time to get online, or the light of the Lord returning. The light of the Lord coming for the advent that was promised all the way back in the day. That's where the hope comes from in this Advent series, or in this whole Advent season. We have a promise that when God walked this covenant mile alone, we have the promise from him taking the punishment, the Lord taking the punishment, to the promise that the king was going to be born in a small town, and that he was going to be torn and wear our iniquity for us. The same God that was yesterday, today, tomorrow, and forever is the same God that walked that aisle alone in Genesis 15. Just because Adam began in the darkness doesn't mean the darkness has the final say. There's hope in his name, hope in his salvation, and there's just hope in the promise that's guaranteed by our God because he never breaks the promise. Let's close the prayer. With head bowed, eyes closed, Lord, I just want to thank you for this season. I want to thank you for the sending of your Son, that he came down in flesh so that he could be torn for our transgressions. Lord, that there is hope in his name. There's hope for anyone that calls on it. And there's hope for everybody. That every ear will hear, every knee will bow, and every mouth will confess. Lord, you are faithful to us, just as you were faithful in agree that you will reign forever, now, forever, and forever will come. And I just ask that everybody here, Lord, that you have your hands of blessing upon them as they've heard of your advent, they know of your name. Lord, I ask that if there's anybody here today that has not quite called out your name, Lord, I just ask that they have the courage to come talk to us. Talk to me, Chris, Chaps, anybody. I'd love to share his name with you. I'd love for you to be able to know the same God that I have this amazing hope in. I'd love to share that with you. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
We're going to close with the song Evidence. Please stand. All throughout my history, faithfulness has walked beside me.